Hey everyone, this is Lauren. Today I'm going to share with you 5 tips that every Southern gardener should know in order to grow beautiful, abundant rose blooms. I've been growing roses in the South for about 20 years, and let me tell you, it took me half that time to finally figure out what actually works in our tough Southern soil. So if you struggled with roses, I've got you. Today I'm sharing all the tips and methods that completely transformed my rose garden. This took me years to learn and figure out, so I'm telling you this now so you don't have to learn by trial and error like I did. Tip number 1, raised beds with quality soil. This is essential. Southern soil is usually hard clay and full of rocks. Roses do not love that. Their roots need to breathe, and heavy clay soil is not ideal. I'll never forget the first David Austin roses I ordered. I planted 2 Pat Austin roses flanking my driveway back at our first house. And back then we didn't have the money for a bunch of extras. So even just getting the Pat Austin roses was such a stretch. And so I planted them in clay soil since we didn't have extra money for amendments. So of course they did terribly. They barely stayed alive. They struggled, and I think they eventually ended up dying. I had also tried to grow LD Braithwaite and a couple of others I can't remember the names of, and those ended up dying as well. My heart was broken because at the time we just, didn't have the money to spend on a bunch of gardening soil and amendments and things like that, especially with 2 young children. The only roses that did do well was the variety called Heritage by David Austin. But those roses would fall apart so quickly I had hardly any time to enjoy them. The rose blooms would just shatter after only 2 days. So I've learned my lesson over time, and now I build my beds with at least 6 to 12 inches of landscaping mix, which you can grab from a local landscape supply yard. The same places that sell bulk rocks, mulch, and sand. Trust me, that rich, loose soil makes all the difference. We would buy the truckloads of it to be delivered and then shovel it into our newly formed garden beds. And once I started doing this method, my roses really started to thrive and grow beautifully. So I cannot put enough emphasis on how important it is to start with good soil. Tip number 2, sunlight. Most roses love full sun. All roses love full sun, really. If you can give them 6 hours or more a day, they'll reward you with blooms. Some varieties can tolerate part shade, but the more light, the better. And tip number 3 will help your roses bloom and thrive even more so in a part shade area. Tip number 3 is fertilizing and care, which also includes pruning. So let's start with fertilizing. I started using Maxsea fertilizer, and my bloom count doubled, maybe even tripled. Here's how I use Maxsea fertilizer. I take about 1/3 of a cup and sprinkle half under each rose. That's around 2.5 heaping tablespoons per plant. So yes, it's a double dose of the recommended usage, but my roses love it. I spread it evenly around the roots, then water it in really, really well. That's it. It's easy, it's quick, it's super effective. I've tried other methods, but they usually just take too much time. This one works best for my schedule, and it gives me incredible results. Early in the season, right after pruning in late winter, I also spread hollytone around the roses. And then once I see about 1 inch of new growth, I hit them with the Maxsea. I've tried Dr. Earth fertilizer, which is great, but Maxsea made my roses bloom on another level. I'll occasionally use Rose RX if I see a pest or if something pops up, but overall, I don't really need it too much. I run a no-spray garden and seldom deal with disease. Why? I credit it to the soil, the fertilizer, and most importantly, which brings me to tip number 4, my rose selection. But before we get to tip number 4, I almost forgot to address pruning. That goes in along with the care of roses. Pruning too much can actually stunt the growth of your roses and stress them out. And then pruning too little can sometimes make them bloom less. So the bottom line is some pruning will encourage blooms, and pruning too much is going to stress out your plant too much. So you kind of have to think of like the Goldilocks effect. So not too much, not too little. You want it to be just right. So this really stands for hybrid tea roses when I'm speaking on pruning. You're going to treat climbers in a completely different way. You don't want to prune those very much at all, because you're going to be cutting off blooms when you do that. So you want to do minimal pruning on climbers, and you can get more aggressive with hybrid teas. All right, so tip number 4 is choosing the right roses for your climate. This is a big one. I mostly grow Cortis and Meland roses now. They're highly disease resistant and really thrive here in the South. I started out with all David Austins, and honestly, that was a tough way to begin rose growing. Most of them just don't like our heat and humidity. I still grow a few that do well here, but for the most part, I've shifted to what actually works. Some of my best performers are Sweet Mademoiselle, Summer Romance, Earth Angel Parfuma, Bliss Parfuma, Moonlight in Paris, Cinderella Fairy Tale. There's also Princess Charlene de Monaco. These are all Cortis and Meland roses, and they do absolutely fantastic in my garden. And I highly suggest, if you're new to rose gardening, start with one of these roses, because you're going to get instantaneous gratification, which unfortunately I did not get when I started off with David Austins. I was sorely disappointed when I started off, but I was deeply committed to making my rose dreams happen. Let's touch back on fertilizing, because I cannot talk about it enough. I only apply Maxsea fertilizer typically 2 or 3 times in a season. Once or twice in early spring, when the roses have about an inch of new growth, I hit them again just before they bloom, and then again in early to midsummer. And that's it. And honestly, it really works beautifully. So again, I use 1/3 cup, sprinkle it half under each rose. So, it ends up being about a double dose, maybe a little bit more. And in fact, on my larger sized roses, like Summer Romance, which gets really huge, I'll actually even sprinkle a little bit more than that. I'm usually not super strict about exactly how much I put underneath each plant, but I'm just giving you a roundabout idea. And then I water that in generously, and then it's done. It's quick, it's easy, and it's super effective, and it doesn't take me all day to fertilize my roses. A couple years ago, I tried pulling this massive tank around my garden, and oh my goodness, it was such a workout, and it was exhausting and so time consuming. And I know for some people that works out great, especially if you have a gator or some sort of little golf cart or a Polaris or something like that you can pull the tank around. That's wonderful if that works for you. But for me in my garden, it just doesn't, the layout of my garden doesn't work with that. And so I'm having to do everything by hand. I've also experimented with the low and slow method, which is basically doing smaller weekly doses of fertilizer. And Grace Rose Farm actually recommends that, and it works great too. But again, for me, it's just not realistic with my schedule. I'm a busy mom and we travel frequently. So I've found that just doing a double dose method 2 or 3 times a year is really what works. And it works just as well without all of the upkeep. All right, we're now here at tip number 5, my last tip, which is watering. One of the most important and sometimes overlooked parts of growing healthy roses is consistent watering. Roses are thirsty plants, especially in the southern heat, and if they don't get enough water, you'll see it fast. Weak stems, drooping leaves, fewer blooms, and overall just poor performance. I make sure to give my roses a deep watering at least once or twice a week, more frequently if they are new roses getting established, also depending on the weather, whether it's rained or not. If we're going through a dry spell or extreme heat, I'll water them even more frequently. The key is to water deeply at the base of the plant, not overhead, which helps reduce the risk of disease and encourages deeper root growth. I highly recommend using a soaker hose or drip irrigation system if you can. It makes life so much easier and it ensures the water goes exactly where it's needed. I have drip irrigation in some parts of my garden, but not all. So a lot of my roses do get water from the grass sprinklers and via hand watering. This is where it's really good to have those disease-resistant cordis roses. If your roses end up getting most of their water overhead via grass sprinklers, then you don't have to worry about black spot issues very much because cordis roses are so highly disease resistant. But if you're hand watering, just make sure you give the rose time to really soak in the water. A quick little sprinkle isn't going to cut it. Roses love consistent moisture, but they don't want to be soggy. So if you're in an area with clay soil like I am, that's another reason why raised beds are so important. They allow for better drainage while still retaining enough moisture to keep your roses happy. And here's a simple tip I use all the time. If you're ever unsure whether your roses need water, just stick your finger a couple inches into the soil. If it feels dry, it's time to water. It's quick and it's free and it helps you stay in tune with what your plants really need. You don't need all these fancy contraptions that, water meters and whatever people, a lot of different people use. One thing though is that I've learned in all of my years of rose gardening, especially here in the South, is that no matter how well you prepare, Mother Nature always has the final say. There's going to be times when you do everything right, the soil, the watering, the fertilizing, and your rose dies. Or a big storm comes through and snaps all your best blooms. Or the dreaded Japanese beetles show up in June and start feasting before you've even had a chance to enjoy your roses. It's frustrating, I know. But I've learned to make peace with what's out of my control and instead focus on what I can do, like, for instance, applying milky spore to help with the beetle grubs and building strong raised beds that hold up better in heavy rain. I remind myself that gardening is a partnership with nature, not a battle against it. And every season brings its own surprises. Sometimes heartbreak, yes, but also magic that you didn't expect. That's just part of the beauty of the garden. One garden pest that is still really bugging me is those darn Japanese beetles. Come June, they're in my roses, and if you're in the South, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So this year, I'm applying milky spore again to my yard and garden beds. It targets the grubs in the soil. That's where those Japanese beetles overwinter. It's a long game. I plan to apply it consistently for the next 2 or 3 years to break the beetle cycle. It's not an instant fix, but I'm hopeful it'll make a big difference over time. So, if you're in the South and you want to grow roses that are lush, healthy, and full of beautiful blooms, just follow my 5-step method. Raised beds with good soil, Maxsea fertilizer with proper pruning, sunshine, choosing the right varieties for your climate, and regular watering. Stick with those and you'll be amazed. If you have any questions about growing roses in the South, drop them in the comments. I'd love to help. And don't forget to follow me for more rose tips and garden magic. Happy growing, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.